evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Working in UX Design. I'm Daylon over here, and I'm your host for this evening. We'll be chatting with Wenshu Kwek from Shopify, and he'll be sharing a lot of his experiences as a senior UXer and how we should be learning and networking as a UXer. So the reason why we did these sessions was due to COVID, where we saw a dip in the number of live events where designers could gather and learn from each other. So that's why we decided to create our monthly webinar sessions, and we've been doing it ever since 2020. Okay, so if you're new here, you're welcome to sit around and be as part of the audience. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a note. If you're on Facebook, watching this live with us, feel free to drop some comments as well, and we'll get to you as well. Okay, so let me first introduce our guest for this evening, Wenshu. Wenshu is a senior product designer at Shopify with a background in industrial design.
Oh.
He helps to reduce risk in product development and solves high-impact problems with elegant and thoughtful solutions. He works best in cross-functional teams and has been working for 7 years, shipping successful B2C and B2B products and services. So that's something we'll also discuss with Wenshu. And beyond working with leading global tech companies and startups and government agencies, he tries to find time to give back to the local design community. Okay, so just to start off, Wenshu, how's your day going, and what's keeping you busy these days?
Hello. Thanks for the good introduction.
Yeah.
So it's been a weird day. Pretty busy at work.
Okay.
Lots of announcements at Shopify.
Okay.
But yeah,
sure. So
work.
yeah, in terms of being busy, I know Shopify is like growing, and you're serving a lot of merchants, and there's like this boom in e-commerce right now. So just wondering, can you describe to me like what's your day-to-day like?
So I work with the marketplaces team in Shopify. So you're familiar with Shopify. We are an e-commerce tool. Like if you want to sell anything online, you can use Shopify to build a store, set up an online store, like sell to customers. So what my team works on is we help Shopify merchants sell on more surfaces, like to sell on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Google. So I'm working with the team that works on that. So it's pretty complex, lots of stakeholders. A typical day is
okay.
Lots of conversations, like working with many.
Okay. That sounds like fun. And I know a lot of my friends who are e-commerce entrepreneurs, personally, they use Shopify, and even like we even have a case study about it, about transitioning and replatforming to Shopify from one of our product mentors. So what sort of like drives you to wake up every morning and do what you do?
Oh, it's a good question. So I think as a designer, one thing that motivates me is the idea that I can. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but like solving problems. It's a million different super difficult problems out there, and I think as designers, like we are in a very good position to kind of help teams and businesses solve these problems, right? Like especially e-commerce, it's so complex. There's so much complexity, right? Just to sell something, right? And then what I got to do every day is look at this complexity, and then try to like simplify it for a human on the other end, right? So that's really fun. And it's also nice to like work on global products, to know that something that you work on, even if it's a small button, right, it might touch like a million different like humans like all around the world. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. And I see that you work on both B2B and B2C products. So let's talk a little bit about that. I know you were previously in ThoughtWorks, and you work on some consumer products, and now you're in Shopify, and it's more like B2B because you're serving businesses. Can I understand what are some of the things as a practitioner of UX, I should be taking note when working on all these two different segments?
So I think, so one thing for me is, I think we often talk about how there might be a difference, but in the end of the day, it's actually very similar. You're still like solving user problems, right? The way you approach any design problem like is the same, right? So I think it's in real. So I started working on B2C products. I've designed some consumer apps, right? And then after I left consulting, I went to Foodpanda. I worked on the restaurant portal, and then I went to Shopify to work on merchant products. So I really wanted to go into B2B, but having made that transition, it feels the same, right? It's all the same. But one thing that is quite different is, I think, especially if it's a very complex like B2B product. So in a lot of consumer products, how should I say this? Problems feel very solved. Like a lot of the problems, like if you want to do a checkout flow, right? Like a million different checkout flows like out in the internet, right? You can go and Google, you can search for it. I can do competitor analysis. But if I'm working on a B2B product, like it's super complex, like, so how do I integrate a store and sync like 1,000 products, like with like Instagram, for example, right? There's nothing for me to Google, right? It's way more complex.
And you can't exactly get the reference that easily, as you mentioned, right? Because consumer products you can just download and then like you immediately have a reference.
Yes. And I would say most B2B products is not as sexy, and it's not the trendiest thing to work on. So a lot of my colleagues, and when I talk to when I advise juniors that I've met, they want to work on B2C, and it's super exciting. I want to work on Instagram, I want to work on the new like Shopee app, right? But yeah, I also think there's a lot of like very rich problems, right, in the B2B space, and problems that are hidden, maybe super complex, no one wants to care about. But if you're a designer and you want to work on that, right, and I think that's a really nice niche.
So since we're talking about problems and you're saying designers are like problem solvers, what would be an example of a B2B problem that is interesting?
Trying to think of what I can talk about.
Or even from your previous like engagement.
Okay, so one thing that's not so obvious, right, with a lot of B2B products. So let's use Foodpanda as an example, right? When you use the Foodpanda app, right, and you open the app and you want to order food, there's a menu, there are like photos, there's a price, right? Like it looks really simple, right? But then behind the scenes, right, there is an entire like super complex tool, right, that a restaurant owner who is often not tech savvy, right, has to set up. Right. So one thing I did learn when I was in Foodpanda is like just ordering bubble tea. Right. How do you design a way for someone to order bubble tea? Right. That's really simple for a consumer, like super complex if you're a restaurant owner, like how many percent sweetness, right? 50%, 5%, how much sugar, how much ice do I want? And based on these variations, the price changes, right? So how do you configure all these? So that's like super complex, like super rich problem to solve. And it requires a lot of like systems thinking, right? Working with developers, working with business folks, your PM. So I think that was what I worked on in Foodpanda that I can talk about. I hope.
I don't remember if I ordered bubble tea on Foodpanda, but I do remember placing an order for something quite complicated on Foodpanda recently, and I just realized how easy it was. I was like, oh, I can do all these customizations. I think it might have been like eating at Muji or something like that, Muji Cafe. So that was really interesting, where you had like variations of like what food to choose and stuff like that. That's an interesting problem to work on. And you're saying it's slightly more obscure, right? Like the work that you in B2B is also a little bit more niche. It doesn't touch as many people as like a B2C piece of work. So how do you feel about that?
So as I've become more senior, I think I care less about the number of people I touch, but more like the value that I create, right? So for example, you can, like my PM and I once worked on a problem that for an internal tool, it's a button, but that one button like can save the company like 6 figures, right? Every 6 months or something like that. Right? So
what kind of button
that
is
kind
that?
of value. It's for an internal tool, and then kind of like
right.
save.
It's an internal tool within Shopify.
Yeah.
Okay, so contain more. All right.
With Foodpanda, but and then it's nice, like to kind of flip the framing a bit, right? So it's more about impact, right? GMV, how much GMV can I create, or how much money can I save, right? Yeah, I care a lot less these days if I see someone on the train and then they're using something I might design. It's like, okay, it's fine. I don't care so much anymore. But
so that's nice. I mean, it sounds like you've grown up. It sounds like you're moving from vanity metrics to GMV, as you call it, like gross marginal value, which is actual financial impact on based on the products that you, or the design that ends up in the products. Like, let's talk a little bit about, you know, your transition from junior to senior. And earlier you spoke a little bit like juniors are more excited to work on consumer stuff because it touches a lot of people. Now that you're more senior, you're more about like the impact. Can you tell us a little bit more? Yeah, what else has changed?
I can reflect on my personal experience as well. I think when I first started out as a junior designer, it's all about process, right? To get from A to B, there's a certain step, there's a certain like framework I need to use, like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like if I follow these and I answer all the questions correctly, like I would get to the solution, right? And I was all about process, right? But the real world is like tricky, right? It's not that straightforward. And so when things get bent, right, projects go crazy, things start burning, right, then I'll be really unhappy. No, you're not doing it properly. You're not doing research. You're not talking to stakeholders. You're not giving me enough time to design. But so that was me when I first started out. But then as I've become more experienced, and then so I started to realize that oftentimes to get from point A to point B, sometimes you can skip certain steps. And for me, that's the sign of being a distinction between a senior and junior, right? Seeing the process, right, and knowing what you can skip, right? I don't know if that makes sense, right? Like, okay, you don't always need to talk to users, for example, right? Not every problem has to solve everything. Sometimes you need to make trade-offs, right? You need to be happy with that. So I think for me, that's like the distinction, right? We can move to becoming more senior, more experienced.
It sounds like you kind of know, like, because you know what you're doing, because you know your tools, you kind of economize the number of steps you take, or, you know, or even be, I would say, be more efficient at what you're doing. Yeah.
Efficiency is one thing, but also knowing what steps to skip, right? Sometimes it comes with experience, like maybe you failed at many times, right? And then you finally know, okay, you know, yeah, especially when you work in a product company, there is never an ideal project, right? So be aware, right, when it's not ideal, and accept it, right? Find ways to adjust the way you work, right? The methods you use. So I think that's when you start to become a bit more senior, when you're able to like roll with the punches, right? And then
yeah, that makes sense. Since we're on reflection, let me ask you another reflection question. Looking back, you know, all these years, like working in UX design, which is the title of our podcast and webinar, can you tell me what advice would you share with your younger designer self?
Design is a job, right? In the end, right? Like it's a job, right? And like any job, there will be days when it sucks, right? There will be days when you have endless meetings. You will do really stupid things. You will do really tedious things. you need to deal with politics, right? Deal with like relationships. It's a job, right? And I think when we learn design, right, it's all like ideal stuff, right? Okay, you're gonna go out there, you're gonna save the world. As long as you follow this double diamond thing, right? It's like everything's perfect. But then once you go out, oh shit, everything's on fire. My PM doesn't like me, right? Things like that. Now, how do I deal with that? So yeah, I don't know if it's good advice or not, but
it's not as rosy as it seems when you're out there.
It never is, right? But then like, I think it's healthy to acknowledge that, right? And not like beat yourself up. Because I used to do that. So if something was not ideal, I'll be like, oh shit, I'm a bad designer, or I'm not doing enough work, or maybe like, oh, this company sucks, right? This client sucks, but hey, I think it's a job, right? There are bad days, and everything's like a good learning experience in the end.
And that's a proverbial question. I think you mentioned offhand earlier. You say like, hey, you're not giving me enough time to design. And I think as designers, we always feel like, hey, like we don't have enough time to do something. We don't have enough time to do research. We don't have enough time to do design. So how would you manage that right now if you're not really given enough time to do design or research?
So I once had this conversation with a tech lead, and this is what he told me, right? Like the thing that you're building today that you think is really good, right? In 5 years, it's gonna suck. Right? So when trends evolve, right, or like, I mean, nothing stays still in software. Right? Things evolve, things change. Like in 5 years, it's gonna suck anyway. So why are you so stressed about making it perfect today, right? And he was talking about code, right? But I think the same thing with design, right? What looks nice today is gonna look bad. Okay, maybe not even 5 years, like in 2 years, right? So why stress so much? So, and I think it comes from this mindset that we need to be perfect all the time, right? So yeah,
I think that's kind of like a curse of being an artist or being a designer or creative. You know, like things have to be perfect. Yeah, we never stray too far from that. Any advice on how to like manage that a little bit better?
Kind of treat everything as an iteration, right? So, I mean, assuming you're working in a healthy like environment, right? Your team is iterating, right? The first version is always going to suck, right? But then there is always a second version, like in a few months, you can iterate, and after that you can keep like evolving the product. That's one way. Another way is really just working really closely with the engineers, right? Product people, your business stakeholders, so to understand decisions, like why they're made, how things come about. So once you have a bigger understanding of the things that affect the design, and I think it becomes a lot easier to accept any kind of trade-offs that you feel you might be making, right? So maybe the corner radius is not the perfect radius, maybe the color's slightly off, right? But then, hey, there are all these reasons behind it. Or we're still creating GMV, we're still creating like user value. So that's kind of how I try to see it these days.
Yeah, so true. And we have a question from the crowd over here. So someone is asking, when you were a junior designer, how do you deal with or salvage any mistakes, and also try and learn from it?
Let me think. So there was this one project where I think it was what was it? Okay, it was a project in Thailand. So we were designing insurance apps, right? It was an insurance related product for farmers in Thailand. So the user, right, is someone who's like not tech savvy at all. And then they're very used to this like really lousy app, like with a really weird interaction pattern. It just makes no sense at all. And then when we redesigned it, like we insisted on doing it the right way, right? There's a correct pattern, right? And I won't go into details because it's really hard, like without a whiteboard. But so we redesigned it, new pattern, it's the correct design guideline. Right? We followed all of Apple's like human interface guidelines, everything. We did testing. Yeah, no one could use it, right? That's just not how they're used to. doing it, right? They're used to this like really like, weird way to interact with an old app, right? And then I think that was a huge learning experience for us, right? It's quite humbling, right? I think we often have an ego, right? When we design something, we wanna have an ideal state in mind. Okay, I'm gonna force this on my user, but then once we did testing, hey, it doesn't work. So how did I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. I mean, it showed that your design didn't work and did not work as you all assume. So what happened? Like, how do you salvage it?
I think the good thing was the engineers I worked with, like we happened to bring them down for the user test as well, right? Which was entirely by chance, right? It's coincidental. So then we didn't need to convince anyone. Right? Everyone saw how the app would fail, right? So in a way, like it was quite easy for the team to kind of like recover. Like when I think back in hindsight, like had we not done that, and we just went out to test, and we go back to office, right, and we report, hey, it's not working. And then the engineers, oh, I just spent like 6 months working on this, right? Are you telling me and you want me to redesign this? So yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the fact that everyone was there to see the test. Yeah.
So you got the cooperation of the engineers, and I'm guessing they made some iterations on the spot.
Yeah, and they were able to like change things on the fly and then like test it quickly. So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that sounds like quite an adventure. Did you guys end up staying longer than you expected in Thailand, or what happened?
No, I had to fly back, so I wasn't there to like see through the project. But wish I was there. The food was good.
Okay. Yeah. We all love Thai food.
Yeah.
So that's always a bonus. So great that you sort of like had sort of the I guess the humility to kind of recognize it and then try your best to recover from it with the assistance and the help. What's your takeaway from that experience? So what's your lesson?
Just be humble, right? So I think like just because you think there's an ideal solution, right, ideal design, a lot of times when you talk to an actual user, right, hey, actually it's not, maybe it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Be very humble.
Be very humble, be very open. I think that sounds like good advice. So we have another question from the audience who is asking, how do you manage uncertainty if the scope or objectives are not well defined for you? Yeah, and what's your best advice to manage stakeholders who are requesting changes near the release? That sounds like another big question on it. So maybe let's start with the first one. How do you manage uncertainty if work scope and objectives are not well defined?
To be honest, that's something I struggle with, right? It's something I do need to work on. So I think ambiguity is something that's really stressful, and I think so one thing that I found that has helped is to kind of identify like just a smaller step that I can take, right, and then just do it, right? So if something's super unclear, right, I don't know what's supposed to do, I just find the small things you can do and then just do it, right? And then as you start doing things, right, you things become clearer. So I remember we once had a project that was super unclear when I was a consultant, and then we were almost like kind of waiting for requirements to come down, right, from the client, right? And we wanted to research, okay, like to get requirements from customers, right? But then after a while we realized, hey, maybe we should just start designing, right? That's a small thing we can do, right? And then after we started designing some wireframes, it started to answer some questions, right? Now once you had a design, right, and then the client sees it, oh, actually things could be this way, right? And then it helped to clarify things, right? So sometimes just like taking a small step forward, just start designing, right? Sometimes I think that the temptation is always to like spend time researching, right? Spend time thinking, like understanding what's the requirement, but sometimes you just need to move forward and take a small step.
Yeah, sounds like it's taking a small step towards clarifying or clarity itself. So that's on sort of scoping and managing the objectives. What's your best advice to manage like stakeholders who are requesting huge changes near a release? Has that happened to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think hopefully you're working with a product manager who can help like manage these conversations, right? So I think ideally you're working really closely with your cross-functional team, right? Or I think Shopify we call it a trifecta, right? Engineering, product, design. Like if you're working very closely together, right? And then when stakeholders come in and they request a change, right, in scope, right? It doesn't just affect design, right? It affects the product roadmap, it affects engineering. When everyone can come in and give a appropriate response, right? The trifecta, right, can come in, right? And then I think it's a much more measured like way to kind of respond to things like these.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like putting heads together, and not all heads are from the same department.
Yeah.
And what about managing difficult stakeholders in general? Like,
it's all about relationships, right? I think it's almost like whether or not you have influence, right, in a company is the number of people you can have like casual coffees with, right, in a way. Like if you can just like go to your business stakeholder and you can just have a coffee chat, okay, you have influence, right? So I think building relationships is really, really important, right? And it's the things we tend to forget, right? Especially when it's remote, right? Or okay, I don't need to make friends in office, right? I don't need to like talk to people, ask them how their day is going. When you build relationships over time, there is like more trust, right? And then so when difficulty arises, things become challenging. I think you can solve them much easier, like when you have a good relationship like with the people you work with.
I fully agree with that, and I think I've never heard of the metric of a number of coffee chats you can have with people as a measure of your influence. But certainly, I think what really has helped when I was working in product management is being able to like take people out for lunch and ease things, bring people together, for example, and ease things. And I think that certainly helped a lot. Like food and drinks really bring people together.
And there's a temptation to like offload that work to the PM. Like, okay, it's your job, right? I'll just focus on design. But I think as designers, it's very important to do that as well.
Okay. So yeah, we're back to this question where it's like really the heart of what we're talking today, which is networking, right? And most designers I know are very introverted, right? I've hardly seen very extroverted designers. I don't know which one you relate to a little bit more. So tell me a little bit, like, let's say you're a little bit more shy and you're a little bit more introverted. How would you engage a stakeholder, or how should you like talk to people in the community or do networking? Yeah.
Okay, so I hate networking. Like, I've always hated it. So and I'm very introverted. So I think that's where I come from. But so maybe I think there's a bit of story here, like, so which is how I got into UX. So I first started as an industrial designer, right? And then at one point in my career, I wanted to make a switch, but I wasn't completely sure. And then I found out that there's this community called like UX SG, right? UX Singapore. They were doing a conference. They're looking for volunteers. And I thought, if I volunteer, I can attend a conference for free, right? So I volunteered and then just to attend a conference for free. And then, but long story short, I continued to stay as a volunteer. And then I just started showing up, right, at every meetup to kind of help organize things. And I never did it with the intention of like networking. I just did it because like I was learning something, and then I wanted to kind of like give back. And because of UX SG, I managed to move into UX, so I wanted to give back. But then because I was always like showing up at these meetups, right? Over time, people see the same face, right? Then they just come to you to talk. And so I never like, I was never the kind of person to go to a meetup and, hey, hi, I'm Wenshu, you know, like, I just kind of volunteered. I was always there. And then at some point, like, okay, people started coming to talk to me. So that was how I kind of like reverse networked.
And I would tell the audience that I can verify that because I seen you in one of those events, and that's actually how we met.
Yeah.
And you're very, very, very quiet. In fact, you just sat there and listened to everyone talk. Well, I would admit I'm quite a silent type myself, but you're even more silent than me. So like is that the trick? Like just show up and let people like reach out to you.
Yeah, just show up. At one point someone will talk to you. But also I think networking becomes a dirty word if you only think about it from like, okay, what value am I getting from this relationship? Right? This person that I'm talking to, like what value am I getting out of it, right? Which is like a kind of a scarcity mindset. Right. So if you have a more like abundant mindset, okay, I'm here to bring value to someone, and then they would give me some value, and then it's networking becomes a lot less dirty, right? Like,
I think I like that you said that, and actually, it's true that networking is like a dirty word for many people. And I do find that it's extremely valuable in your professional career, right? Because like your next job might be referred to someone that you know from a conference or from an event that you attend. So I'm wondering, like, when you say add value, right? And you're a designer, correct? And maybe you're not very experienced as a designer. How do you add value to people?
Oh, wow.
Or so how do you do it like in the past, right? Because you're not very senior, but you're there, you're listening, you're showing your face, you're showing up. Yeah.
I think back then for me it was because I was volunteering. I was volunteering for the meetups, right? So I helped to kind of like create a space, right, for other designers to meet up. So that's how I saw my value, kind of like helping you meet other people. And the thing is, no matter how junior you are, right, there's always someone more junior than you. And so there's always someone who you can like give advice to. I love that mindset. So yeah, so when I attended UXSG, even when I was very early in my career, there would always be someone right from like uni or like poly who'd like show up and they're like, "Oh, what's UX?"
Oh my God, I love that mindset. So you're never naked because there's someone more naked than you are.
Yeah. There's always someone, and you never know who they will become, right? So always help out. Like maybe 5 years down the road, like they become someone you can work with. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great way to kind of like think about it. And for people who are a little bit more not too extroverted, you're suggesting that maybe they could play the role of a facilitator or play the role of a volunteer and try and add value to the community. So it's kind of I don't think you have to do a lot as a volunteer, do you? Like what?
Not much.
What do you have to contribute exactly? Like just your time?
Back then, the principle that I think Raven and Michael had was like, it should be as little effort as possible. Right? Lowest effort, highest impact. So we just did like, I think we ran this thing called open space, right? Where there's no agenda, nothing, right? It's just we open the space for you, you come in, and then you propose like topics you want to discuss, right? And then we just vote on it. And like people like self-organize. And so there really was very little effort like in organizing the meetups back then.
But as someone who run events, I actually know the amount of work that goes behind it, especially like a conference where you have to get the speakers. But maybe for volunteers, there might be a very more specific role for you to play. So that sounds like a good idea. Definitely looking to all these like physical meetups as they are opening up again. So I think it's a good opportunity for all the junior designers here to volunteer yourself for physical events. And just kind of wondering, like, how has volunteering, how has networking, how has participating in this community, how has it helped with your career?
I think on the baseline level, it's just knowing that there are people outside that are like me, right? Going through similar problems, right? Someone who I can rent, that would be outside the company I'm in, right? So I can say things I wouldn't dare to say in my company. So I think that has been very healthy for me. But I think also a lot of my roles, a lot of the jobs that I've been offered, interviews that I've been offered, right? They came from networks, right? It's not like you don't see it on LinkedIn, right? You don't see it on my job portals. So I think that has really helped. But it was never like always like one way. So I try to like help as well. Like if I know someone's looking for a job, I'll try to connect them with someone else. So in a way, like giving, right? But then when you give, right, at some point you get something back in return. Just don't like abundant mindset. Right? Just don't be like, hey, I must always get something.
Yeah. I think there was this book called Give and Take or something.
Yeah.
They talk about 3 types of people, right? Givers who give a lot, takers who only take, and then people who keep score about giving and taking. So it's like equal kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do that, networking wouldn't be fun.
Yeah, so you're in the giving camp. You don't really keep score.
No, I don't.
Okay, that's excellent. I'm sure a lot of people here would love to be friends with you. So I think in this case, I'm wondering, you mentioned earlier that there was this conversation where you have with your tech lead where you learn something. So let's talk a little bit about learning from non-designers. Like how do we learn from non-designers?
I think it starts from recognizing that everyone has an impact on the design, right? So like, no matter how nice you design something on Figma, a developer has to build it, right? So in a way, a developer is a designer as well, right? They have as much influence on it as you do, right? So, and by extension, like there's a lot that you can learn from them. When I first worked on a mobile app, like my first like consumer mobile app, like I've never done mobile apps before. So I had no idea like what iOS was. I was an Android user. I don't know the patterns. I don't know how screens flow, but there was a front end dev that was like really, really good. Like he knows everything and the patterns to use. And then, okay, so I'll just learn from him, like trust him, trust that they have like good intentions, right? Like no one goes to work with the intention of doing a bad job, right? So, that's when I really learned like, okay, there's a lot, even like interaction design, right? I learned a lot of interaction design like from the engineer, the iOS like engineer, like who knew more about iOS than I did. So ever since then, I've always seen them as a source of learning, right?
That's excellent. I think engineers have a lot to teach us. Even as a product person, I learn from the engineers. I listen to my engineers too. So that is definitely a good source. What about people who are not in the tech industry? Do you learn from them, or is there anything that you learn that you apply back to your work?
I think what's interesting is like if you do get a chance to work with like business folks, right, or like they see things very differently, right? So, and because they see things differently, I think it gives you a different lens, right, on your work, the product that you're working on. So that's something I've learned. I don't know how much I can say, but
yeah, that's fine. I mean, like let's take an example, right?
Yeah.
You shared something about what you learned from the engineers, and that's like how to design better mobile products, how to use mobile patterns, for example. What can you share that you learned from, say, a business person that you are applying as a UX designer?
So I think like a business person never cares about the aesthetic quality of a product, right? It's all about, can it convert, right? How much money am I saving here? If I'm taking 6 months to build this, right? How much money am I losing by not building this sooner, right? So I think that really helped me understand like the actual impact of my designs, right? Just talking to them and again, right, building relationships, right? Just meeting them for Korean barbecue if you can, right? I think it's really learning about that, right? Because they are looking at metrics, they look at Excel sheets, right? I'm so glad I don't have to do that. There's someone to do that for me, right? They see things in a completely different way, right? It really helps, and it also helps you build a case, right, for your designs, right? Because when you're presenting to stakeholders, you can't talk about design principles, right, or how nice this design is, right? And the number of users you spoke with, like they don't care, right? Like a CEO, for example, cares about the impact, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I hear this quite often from more senior design leaders or even more senior designers. It's important for us to justify the impact that we deliver as UX designers. How should someone who's like maybe in their first year as a practitioner, how should they actually learn how to justify their impact more? What books should they read, or who should they be talking to, for example?
Okay, I don't know about books, but I think like relying on your cross-functional peers, right? If you have them, right? Especially the PM. I think the PM is like should be your best friend. You should probably spend more time with your PM than your designer, than the other designers in your team. So yeah, I
Sounds
think
like a good idea.
I mean, a PM is incentivized to like deliver value, right? Like way more than an engineer or a designer. So they're thinking about that like all the time. So I think really leaning on them, right, when you're new, I think that really, really helps.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds great. But what if your PM is also kind of new? Like there aren't many experienced PMs, to be honest, in the industry. So if they're kind of new, like what's the next best person?
The engineer, no? Good question. Then I think in the end of the day, it's really all about relationships, right? So if you have a good relationship, right, with your business stakeholder, if you have any, right, then you can lean on them, right, to kind of help you define, okay, so this is what we're thinking of doing. What does it mean for you, right? What are you looking for? So yeah, like build good relationships with the people you work with, and then I think everything is like a lot easier from there.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense from our conversation, like especially if someone's new to their career, they should really be listening a lot and actually put themselves out there, right? And just learn and be open to cross-functional experts and just kind of like absorb everything like a sponge. Yeah, so that's really great to hear. I'm actually quite curious, like you said that you were an industrial designer, and we happen to run a program that helped mid-career professionals to transition into UX design. I'm sure a lot of them who's hearing this right now could benefit from some tips or advice. How did you make that jump? How did you make that switch from, say, industrial design?
I think if you're coming from industrial design, it's a bit, like you're cheating in a way, because I think industrial design is basically UX, right? But in 3D, right? So, in a way, I think like the fundamentals are the same, right? Like the design process, right? The need to do research, like it's all the same, right? The difference is the medium, right? Everything is like flat, right? And then there's a flow, right? There are designs, right? Things are less permanent. So these are the things that I had to learn. But I think transitioning from industrial design or any if you are transitioning from a design field, I think it's a bit easier.
How would you, I don't know, like who gave you your first opportunity, or how did you manage to obtain your first opportunity to be a UXer?
It's interesting. So, and again, it's true, like networking, even though I wasn't doing it intentionally. So I've actually wanted to do a master's like in HCI, like human computer interface. So I thought I should do that because I wasn't confident. Like do a master's, right, in the US, right, and then from there I'll find a job in the US, like work in the Bay Area. So that was my plan. And then I found a senior on LinkedIn who did exactly that, and I reached out to her. So hey, looking to go into UX. Like, can I set up a call with you? And then we chatted, and then she told me, hey, I'm working at a company in Singapore. Like, we happen to be looking for junior designers, right? So why don't you try and apply? And then I applied. I got an offer, and then she told me, hey, instead of paying money to learn, why not get paid to learn? And that's how I got into UX. So yeah, it was from a random like LinkedIn message to like some senior in US.
That is incredibly serendipitous,
Yeah.
I would say. And wow, very, very lucky that you got an offer. Because these days it's a lot tougher to enter the industry, and it's very, very competitive, I hear. But I think the principle doesn't change, right? The principle here is like reach out to people, ask for help, and talk to them, and something good will happen out of that. Seems like it.
Yeah, and I think most people have a little bit of ego, right? They like it when someone goes to them to ask for advice, right? So if you like ping someone on LinkedIn, hey, I'm this junior looking for help, like most of the time, like they would say yes, right? Unless they're like really busy or yeah.
I think that's that, and I think that's also like ADP list, like platforms like ADP list, where you can ask for help, or there are events you can go to. Even though like UXSG isn't really active right now, there are still like community events like Friends of Figma and all that. So it's at least in Singapore. So in your own locality, I'm sure there's like local events as well for you to be involved, where people have drinks together. I'm just wondering, like, for your role in Shopify, how did that came about?
No, and again, it's because I know RTT. So, and I think so we have a mutual friend, RTT, who's a design.
Is she your boss?
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, got it. I understand.
So, and again, I met her at a meetup, and I believe you were at a meetup as well. It was a product. It wasn't even a design meetup. It was like Product Tonic, the one in Bali.
Oh, right. All right. That's from so long ago. Wow.
Yeah.
That was years in the making.
So yeah, you never know. Like some random person you're speaking with today, like, might become your boss like 5 years later.
That's so true. I mean, that's actually very helpful. Well, I happen to have sold a PlayStation 5 to her.
Oh, no wonder she has a PS5.
Well, I signed up for the waiting list, so then I asked around, and like she happened to be one of the first to reach out. But yeah, that's all good. Are you a gamer yourself, or?
Recently, no, but I do want to play more games. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about design, right? And you graduated with first class honors in industrial design from NUS, and I think someone who knows you is cheering you in the chat. I think it's someone from my team. So I'm trying to understand, like, studying design, what are some of the transferable skills to this new discipline called UX? What are you still using today that you learned from your industrial design days?
I think NUS industrial design is quite a good course. I think what I really use today, I think as a designer, you need to build a vocabulary, right? Like kind of like, I don't know if vocabulary makes sense, like a vocabulary of what good design looks like. Right? And then you do that, like, firstly by just looking at many different things, right? Online, like on Pinterest, like trying different products. Right? So you have a much better sense of what is good taste, like what works well. But then also you learn by doing, right? Try and error. Like in design school is usually really tough, right? You do a lot of iterations. You don't sleep very much, right? So I remember being in studio.
Can we like pause that and talk about all the shit that design school throw at us for a minute? So what okay, tell me more. I want to hear all the stories in design school.
I don't know if they still do that today, but in year one, in NUS industrial design, they would give you a giant block of styrofoam, and you need to shave it down into a 10 by 10 by 10 cm like sphere, and it has to be perfectly spherical, like 10 cm.
You have to do that manually without any machinery.
I don't remember if we were allowed to use a machine. I don't think so. So with like sandpaper and pen knives.
That is
like,
crazy.
Cut it down, and
How
then
the heck can you do that?
and the instructor would like actually measure it with a caliper, right? And if it's off by like just 1 or 2 mm, right? He would like pick it up, like throw it on your head, right, and bounce the ball off your head. So yeah, wow, that was
hilarious.
Like, character building, right? So, and in a way, like today, like when designing something, and I think it's the same thing, right? How it's applicable is like when you're designing something, you just keep doing iterations, right? Sometimes you just need to like brute force it, right? Try like 50 different variations, right? And then from that 50, you have one that's interesting. Yeah, something that I learned.
I think I would say I'm also very appreciative. I think maybe I had it a little bit easier than you did when I went to design school and Polytechnic. But I remember getting my packaging design for an energy drink rejected like 8 times. And the lecturer never bothered to explain to me why. And he just says, hey, you can push it further. Like he'll just give one comment, right? And then I change it based on his one comment, and then he'll give like one more comment. Like, why don't he just like tell me from the start, like these are the 10 things you should look out for? It still puzzles me, but I think it was like what you said. It's a character building process. where you learn to be persistent, and you learn to like be sensitive about the design that you're doing. And I think it really helped me, because after that I was like, oh, I get it, like this is like good design. Oh, this is like not good design. So I definitely find your experience relatable. I heard they treat people worse in architecture.
Oh yeah. It's architecture is way worse. I don't know if it's still true today, but yeah, back then. When I go home from school at 1 a.m., they are still in studio. So
that's pretty crazy. But yeah, we have architects who come to our program as well, and then they say, wow, this is great, man, like we get to go home on time. Like a UX designer, like they don't get to go home on time as an architect. Yeah, that's I think it was such a great conversation, like catching up on past school. And I think I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience at work. I think we have a question from the audience, right? The audience is asking, like, do you use any framework like Kanban to help manage your workload? I'm guessing it's more from a personal perspective. Does it help instill some control in your workload, or does it like clashes with like the timeline? Like, is Kanban effective essentially? Yeah.
The funny thing is that every time I've tried to do Kanban, like the team uses it for a while, and then after like 1 or 2 weeks we stop using it. So I don't know if that's my fault, right, or I'm not doing it correctly.
Sure. But what about your own personal workload?
So Shopify is right now, like Shopify is a remote first company, right? So when you're remote first, we can't rely on like synchronous meetings anymore. So there's a lot of like writing, right? There's a writing culture. So I think from that, what I've learned is to kind of maintain I try to maintain a Google Doc, right? And then treat it like a journal. Right? So every day, okay, this is what I've done. And then I try to break down the things that I need to do, and then like post it on Slack, do a lot of writing, right? And I think that has helped me break down my work, and it helped me be clearer about communicating what kind of work I need to do, right? And why. So I think it's working remotely has forced me to do that.
So let me get this right, because Shopify is a remote first company. How you're managing your work today is that you write a journal of what you did or what you're about to do.
Both, but that's just how I've like processed my own like work.
Okay.
And then how you work with like other folks in your team, I think it depends. It varies from team to team. Usually my preference is to try and track my work together with what the engineers are doing. So if everyone's on GitHub, right, tracking things on a Kanban board, then I would try to like have my work show up as well. So at least people know what I'm doing. Like if not, like, what are the designers doing? It was like you disappear in a cave, like you show up 2 sprints later, hey, and this is the design. But yeah.
I think that sounds like a good idea. I mean, what you're really practicing is this agile principle of like being transparent, and you're working with increments, right? Essentially, yeah. So, what has been the most challenging thing working fully remote so far?
I do miss like office moments. Yeah. So like in office, right, you know, like, oh, you just have, you're gonna go walk over to someone and they start disturbing them, right? Or like shooting the guns, or like going for long lunches. I do miss that. And some things are just easier in person, I think. Right. So
Yeah.
what we do in Shopify is we do this thing called burst, right? So as and when you need it, right, the team can come together and meet at a place, right, for like 3 to 5 days, and then like just like get it done, right, in those like 5 days, and then you fly back, right, and do your and go back into like working remotely.
Like you do that anywhere in the world, or what's happening?
IDD right now, I think with the economy, you know, like
Okay.
strings are tighter, but yeah. But most of my team is in Singapore, so like we do meet up once in a while.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So we have a question on UX coaching. Do you coach people on UX, or like what's going on? Like, do you actually do coaching at all? Okay, no.
No, I don't.
All right, so I guess that might not be the right question. What about career coaching? Do you happen to like coach anyone on their careers and stuff?
Nah, I haven't done it, but once in a while, like someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, right? Just like what I used to do right now, 6 or 7 years ago, and then I'll be happy
that's fine.
to call.
Are you actually open to people reaching out to you and asking for career advice? Or
yeah, always happy to help.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. I think as I understand, I mean, career coaching is a little bit different from coaching someone to be a more effective UX designer. I think there's a lot of elements to career coaching, and part of that is like helping the person understand what kind of transferable skills that they have. Like someone like Wenshu, who is an industrial designer, has quite a number of transferable skills into this new field. And then working with them to ensure that they position and present their best self. So that's on career coaching. And then like getting someone better as a UX designer, that's usually like working with them and doing it over time and giving them feedback along the way. And that's something I've also done. And I would say it really depends on how receptive the person is to your advice as a coach, but also how likely are they able to practice like the ideal state of like UX, right? And when we talk about the ideal state, it means like, hey, we have to do it iteratively. Hey, we have to make data-driven decisions. And if they're not able to do any of that, then it becomes like very challenging for them to practice proper UX. And I think Aditi, your boss, always has this criticism for working in consulting, which she says that you're only working on the MVP or the prototype of the product, right? So how does it feel like to work in a product company now?
I think everything that they say is about it is true, right? So I think when I was a consultant, I did many different things, a lot of fun projects, but it's very thin, right? If I'm lucky, I'm there to like ship the first version of the design, right? So I'm there when the developers are building it, But then once it's released, I'm not there to see what happens next, right? So, but then in a product company, it's you go really deep, right, on one product area, right? And the bigger the company, the narrower your scope.
True.
So yeah, but it's nice. Like it's nice to like be able to ship something, right, and be there to like own up to your mistakes, right, or or like see the impact, right?
Yeah, at least you get to see like whether your design works and how it impacts lives. Yeah, I think that's what you mentioned as part of waking up every day, right, to solve problems. Yeah.
But I think in consulting I learned what good looks like, right? Because there's really a very strong focus on ideal practices, like best practices. So I learned it when I was there, and then going into a product company, it's more about, okay, so how do you now deliver value, right, as cheaply or as quickly as possible, right? So it's different types of learning, I would say.
Yeah, that's really excellent advice. If I could ask you one more question, and that is to the audience over here, like, do you have any general advice or tips to help them be a better learner or a better networker as a UXer?
I mean, just put yourself out there, right? So you are never too junior to like help someone. Just like there are always events, like just show up, right? Put yourself out there. You don't have to be an extrovert, right? People will come to you, right? Always be helping people. At one point, someone will help you back. I think that really helps, right? And then also like focus on building relationships, right? Especially with like non-design peers that you work with, because there is so much learning there that we often miss, right? We always assume we must learn from designers, right? We must have coaching from other designers, right? Maybe your coach could be a PM.
I'm going to ask you a fun question. Like, how do you bribe a product manager, and how do you bribe and how do you bribe a business person? Like, what do you use to bribe them? Yeah, let's start with any one of them.
Well, how to bribe?
Like, I mean, like bribe, and I say it in a very like joking way. I don't mean like actually bribe, because that's illegal. But like, what do you bribe them with? Yeah. Like, what do you do to get into their good books?
I think one thing I like to do, which is I like to accept compromises, right? Like I like to accept compromises, like for now, right? When a PM needs to ship something faster, right? And then okay, I'll be compromising. I'll be like, okay, let's do it simple. The design will be less perfect, but we ship it out, right? But then by making these compromises, right, later on, like when you need to push something, right, they are more accepting. So in a way, that's kind of how I
like kind of like
I do it.
Compromise and give and take. That's nice. What about engineers?
I think it's the same thing, right? Like
it's
when
the same thing, all right?
Something's really hard to build. Can you simplify it? Okay, and I'll be like, okay lah, I'll simplify for you, you know. And then next time, if there's something I really want to push, I'll be like, okay, you know.
Yeah, actually, that's really sound advice. I was hoping it involves something with food or something like that, or coffee, right? As you were saying earlier. Okay, so I guess the idea is kind of like to be flexible. What about business people? Is there anything you do to get into their good books?
I don't know. I guess learn what's important to them, right, and try to help them achieve it. Like especially if the new executives join the company, right? They need a quick win to show their value, right? Then like help them solve that quick win, and then that really helps you like be their good books. I mean, it sounds really transactional, but yeah, that's how it is sometimes.
I think it sounds like you're being a team player, right? Like, hey, you're part of the team too. So yeah, you're just like helping them out. Hopefully someday it comes back. Just like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think we had a wonderful discussion with you this evening, Wenshu, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences live with an audience this evening. And for those of you who are listening to listening to this for the first time, I hope you enjoyed the content that we shared here. Do check out our monthly webinar events if you haven't. We do upload all of this on our podcast on Apple and Spotify, as well as on our YouTube channel if you'd like to watch the video. And do check out, if you haven't, our events next month. So if you are not subscribed to our newsletter, please feel free to subscribe. And with that, I shall wish everyone a very good evening ahead and a good day ahead if you're dialing from overseas. Hope you learned something today, and stay curious. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Daylon, for having me. It was
awesome.
fun.